Blog Talk Radio.
Something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scars over the Bill of Rights, have we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold? Because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame. Freedom has only one enemy it cannot defeat, and that is negligence. So your presence here, now, today, is an act of reverence. Of all man's works beneath the heavens, none shines brighter than our Constitution. I think Jefferson and Paine, Adams, Madison, Mason, Franklin, I think they're looking down right now at us. I think they understand what we're trying to do, what we strive to do. Every time our country stands in the path of danger, an instinct seems to summon her finest first, those who truly understand her. When freedom shivers in the cold shadow of true peril, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. When loss of liberty is looming, as it is now, the siren sounds first in the hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Freedomlink Radio. My name's Joe Joseph, and I'd like to welcome you aboard tonight for a very, very important discussion about what happens when a state cannot meet its financial obligations. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be discussed about that, and I'm devoting the show tonight to that topic. And it was because of the Grifster himself. How's it going, Griff?
Hi, Joe.
That we are breaching this subject, and it's a very important subject indeed. You know, Griff, when you think about it, people really aren't prepared for this type of scenario.
No, it's never happened before. There are no rules. No.
Now, for a legal perspective on things, I've invited Margot back to the show. Margot, you there?
Yes.
Hot diggity dog. Glad to have you aboard. It's a very interesting topic, and judging by some of the information that you've sent me, it's from a legal perspective, it's extremely hairy, isn't it?
It is. There's lots of 10th Amendment implications, although no one really wants to come right out and talk about those.
Yeah. Now, I know John King is trying to get in. He's having a little bit of a hard time trying to get into the switchboard, but when he comes on board, we'll add him to the conversation. And I guess the first thing to talk about is the 10th Amendment. How does the 10th Amendment play into this, Margot?
Well, the 10th Amendment basically reserves to the states and the people all rights not expressly conferred to the federal government in the Constitution. The problem is we hardly have any 10th Amendment jurisprudence in this country because everyone's kind of shied away from the 10th Amendment, thinking that it was superfluous, that it basically was just kind of like somebody's appendix. It was just kind of there, and maybe it has a purpose, but really the bulk of the constitutional rights that we utilize are in the body of the Constitution and the other 9 amendments. And so really there hasn't been much development of 10th Amendment law. And I think really that's because when you start getting into the 10th Amendment, it gives people and it gives states too much sovereignty, and it really serves to substantially limit federal power.
Very interesting, isn't it, Griff? The 10th Amendment would actually limit federal power, which it does, but they've conveniently swept it under the rug.
Well, that's the way the courts are, and that's the way the judges have been programmed. They know who their bosses are, and they act accordingly. They won't rule in the favor of the people, regardless of the evidence. They just won't do it, and I've seen it too many times, and I know you have too, Margot.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. For instance, I'll give you a couple examples.
Sure.
There are a bunch of legal battles going on in the United States right now where the 10th Amendment would be completely and totally germane. The first is the Arizona law. For instance, the Arizona law basically raises the question of what happens when the federal government fails in its obligation to secure national security through securing the borders. Do states have a right under the 10th Amendment to step in when the federal government doesn't? Obamacare. Do individuals have the right to refuse health care or refuse health insurance under the 10th Amendment? And, that question is not being raised. Also with Obamacare, do states have a 10th Amendment right to opt out of, implementing state insurance exchanges under the 10th Amendment if it would cause them to go bankrupt or it would, put undue financial stress or, administrative problems on the state level? So these 10th Amendment issues exist, but they aren't being raised by the attorney generals, by the judges, by the citizens. And I think some of that's due to a lack of knowledge. I think some of it is due to a misconception that the 10th Amendment is somewhat irrelevant. And I think some of it is due to the fact that there is a fear of limiting federal power.
Well, why do you think it is then that instead of going the route of the 10th Amendment, that some governors are going down the route of nullification? And nullification, has precedent of being defeated time after time after time after time, but they want to go down that road. Why wouldn't they take up a 10th Amendment argument, you think?
Well, I think the reasons that people don't go into the 10th Amendment argument are the reasons I just said. There's a lot of misconception about the 10th Amendment. For instance, when you go to law school, you're taught that the 10th Amendment is pretty irrelevant. And I think that a lot of people in law school are taught to pursue avenues such as the Commerce Clause, for instance, because those are the areas that the legal intellectuals, perhaps the academics, want more development in the area of law on. But additionally, I think that there's also a fear of limiting federal power. But I think the reason that they tend to opt for nullification over 10th Amendment arguments is even though nullification hasn't been successful, I think they do it anyway either to sabotage the nullification process in the first place, meaning that I think maybe sometimes these governors don't really want to succeed in what they want to do, and I think other times it's just out of sheer ignorance. They perhaps think that a 10th Amendment argument would be just irrelevant when it's actually not. And not only that, but, lots of times when lawyers bring cases, they look at case precedent or history of decisions that have come down in the past to kind of get some guidance as to what direction a legal decision might take if it were brought. Well, as I said earlier, there's almost no jurisprudence on the 10th Amendment. And so in a lot of cases, it's really hard to predict how a 10th Amendment argument would pan out.
It's very interesting to see how that all pans out. Now, a state cannot go bankrupt, correct?
Well,
I mean, in the sense of bankruptcy is a federal process.
Bankruptcy is solely a federal process. You cannot bring a bankruptcy action in a state court. Bankruptcy laws are federal laws. Bankruptcy procedure is federal procedure. All bankruptcy cases are in federal court. So a bankruptcy case, whether it was on an individual level, a business level, a municipal level, a state level, would have to go through the federal system. And it's my belief that if a state were to go bankrupt, and it would actually, and we've never, just so you know, we've never actually had a single state file for bankruptcy ever in the history of this country before. So we're in uncharted waters as we get to the point where states are starting to go broke. So the problem is we don't really know how a state would function in the bankruptcy system, on a legal basis. It's my belief that it would be a conflict of interest for the federal government to declare a state bankrupt and put a state into receivership, because it would be contrary to the 10th Amendment. A state would basically lose its sovereignty if it went broke, because it would have to be a ward of the federal government, accept federal funds, be overseen by a federal, bankruptcy trustee. And so basically a state would lose its ability to be sovereign under the 10th Amendment if it were to go into bankruptcy.
It's very interesting, because it kind of sounds like what happens when a municipality goes into receivership by the state. So what you're saying is it'd be kind of similar to that if that's the way it unfolds.
Yes. And that's my belief. But realize again, though, that we are in completely uncharted waters. It's never been done before, so it's almost impossible to say what exactly would happen. None of us know.
That's right.
It's kind of like physicists discovering something new in space and trying to figure out how it would work. So, in a legal sense, it's like what happens when you go through a black hole. Well, nobody really knows. I guess you just kind of have to find out. And that's a very unpleasant place to be, because, you start getting into areas where the Constitution, like the laws of physics, would not apply anymore.
It's very interesting. Now, John King, welcome aboard, my man. It's about time you showed up.
Oh, well, Skype's giving me some problems, so I had to go the old-fashioned route and use my phone. Glad to be amongst everybody again.
Likely excuse, man. Good morning. But anyway, we were talking about states going bankrupt and what happens when they can no longer pay their financial obligations. I believe I saw an article today talking about the maybe not today, I think it was yesterday, but it had to do with the fact that the states have been neglecting their unemployment. They have unemployment trusts for their unemployment insurance. And over the years, they've been underfunding, and now they're in a real quandary because there's about $461 billion of loans that are coming due, and these states can't even make the interest payment on them. So we were talking about, civil unrest, because once that happens and the structure breaks down where entitlements can't be paid, where welfare can't be paid, where people aren't getting the EBT cards, all that kind of stuff, you're going to have some sort of hedge against that, because you're going to have a lot of irritated, and that's being very polite, but a lot of pissed off people, and a lot of people caught with their pants down. So, John, there's a lot to discuss about that tonight, and we certainly will do that. What do you think the implications are of such a scenario, I guess you could say? Yeah, I know. I said that too, man.
I think it's all heading to. I look at it like a giant pimple, and it's all coming to a head. Over here in the United States, we're going to riot, and we're going to riot to be later, but we're going to protest. The marches of March. The riots over here are going to be more. They're going to mutate. Over there, they're marching for freedom. Over here, we're marching because we're just a bunch of spoiled little babies, and we want our reality TV shows to come back on and sit in our nice, comfortable chair. But many people very soon will be getting their heads yanked out of their proverbial backsides and getting a reality check very, very soon, as the government, the federal government, is about to run out of money March 4th, as many people don't know that. And if you don't think that those people that don't get their welfare checks, their Social Security checks, their SSI checks, won't go out into the street and do a little bit of marching and raising a little hell, you've got another thing coming, brother.
Now, John, one of those ways to one of the things that you need to understand when you do this is food. You need food. Food is going to be the thing